move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is the paper that we have on strengthening patient and public participation. I'm going to invite Victor to introduce the paper and then perhaps turn to Tim for further elaboration. Victor.
Okay, so can I just start by thanking Tim and Karen and Olivia and Anu for the work they've done on this this area of NHS's work. It's a really complex area and it's taken a lot of pulling together of different strands. This is a very ambitious strategy, and if we pull it off, then we'll be leading the way, not just in this country, but possibly around in the world in terms of our transparency, patient and public participation strategy and plans. We have to get two things correct. First of all, we have to meet our statutory obligations under Section 13Q, but we will not, in my view, deliver our statutory obligations unless we have an overarching plan which goes way beyond Section 13Q, which is what is represented in this report and in the 10-point plan. We have had, and I'm going to hand over to Tim in a minute to go through this in slightly more detail, but we've had an excellent engagement with a whole range of players across the public, private and voluntary sectors in getting to this place. It's all about what happens next and the commitment of NHS England to embed this process in the way we do things around here and to shift the culture towards delivering public and patient participation as part of our core approach to delivering health and social care. And with that, I'll hand over to Tim.
Well, thank you, Victor. And just to extend thanks, of course, to you, but also to Margaret Casely-Hayford, Margaret, who's been a really important source of wisdom in the deliberations we've had to put these various proposals together for the board. Also, just to mention thanks to two independent representatives who've been working with us as well, Jason Stamp and David Newton, both of whom have made an enormous contribution. So what's before you today are two documents, essentially, two decisions. One is, hopefully, we will achieve the board's support for the proposed policy on patient and public participation, which has come out of the Task Finish Group's deliberation, and also what's called the Statement of Arrangements, which is the specific legal policy we want to put in place that will support staff in NHS England meet the obligations set out under 13Q, which is the statutory responsibility we have to actively ensure public and patient participation in our decision making, and we need to make that business as usual in the organisation. As everybody around this table knows, we've prioritised this very important value since we started since the commissioning board was first established, and we've been on a journey since that point, and we have quite a long way to go. And I think these papers set out a very clear set of ways in which people can start to embed participation in the way they operate. But I don't want to give the impression, though, that sort of we start from a zero base. Actually, there's an awful lot of very good practice that the Task and Finish Group has heard already in existence in NHS England. And I just wanted to read you this quote from a young person who's been involved on one of the clinical reference groups in specialised commissioning, where a lot of good work has gone on. You can understand patients, the public, have a very keen interest in these areas of specialised commissioning, and I think we have successfully made sure that there is a proper partnership in decision making between the clinical leaders and the patient leaders involved in that. And one of the ways we've done that is by ensuring we have lay representation on the clinical reference group. So here is a young person who's volunteered for that job. Membership of the clinical reference group is a fantastic opportunity to work together. The NHS, charities and young people all working together to ensure services for young people are driven by patient-led opinion. At the CRG, we, the young people, have a full position at the table with equal input and voice. We're able to challenge and be challenged, and we have made a major contribution to a service specification, a commissioning consultation, and proposals on what makes a quality service. And I think that just is an indication that we are making progress, though we have a long way to go. So in the paper, we've set out a 10-point action plan, which in broad emphasis is all about supporting members of staff to understand how they can effectively, as I say, embed these ambitions for putting the patient voice first. There is also a very important responsibility NHS England has to show system leadership on this agenda too. So one of the proposals we're making is that the Task and Finish group will further look at ways in which the system can be encouraged to and incentivised to prioritise patient and public participation through things like the kind of sequin incentives and other ways that NHS England has some input into. I think the other, apart from sort of training, leadership, both very important, we're also prioritising transparency of the way in which this organisation should hold itself to account for delivery of improved patient and public participation. And obviously measuring that is difficult. It's a complexity, but many other organisations have found ways for themselves of delivering proper metrics. And I would obviously hope that the board will want to see proper measures of performance in relation to patient and public participation, and a further proposal in the 10-point plan is that we come up with those proposals and return to the board for your approval of those. So I probably won't go on for too much longer, other than obviously very happy to take any questions. But in broad terms, this is about improving the consistency of our practice in relation to patient and public participation, setting new standards. I think Victor is right. I think this is an ambitious series of proposals. If we are successful, I'm sure we will be in embedding them. It will set a new standard, not just for us, but I think for other public services as well. The proposal is that once, if the board does agree these arrangements, that they will then be very widely publicised to our staff and beyond, because we need to urgently make sure that, as it were, the basic minimum standard that's required for discharge of our legal responsibility is met by all our staff, and we just make sure they're aware of that. But we also want to set, as I say, a much bigger ambition around achieving best practice in patient and public participation, which is the objective. So I shall leave it there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tim. I think that last point, speaking as a lawyer who's worked a lot in the planning environment where public participation is a big issue, first of all, when there's a statutory duty such as 13Q, there's also, in a highly contested area of decision-making, a legal tripwire. So it's absolutely critical to ensure that those who take these decisions have properly incorporated the Section 13Q obligations. But actually, secondly, that's a minimum. So I'm very encouraged by what you say. And by the way, by the two reports as to how people can operate this and implement it in practice, that we can go beyond the minimum and actually have a very genuine engagement in improving the quality of what we do through participation rather than seeing it as a legal process. Yeah. But let me then open up the floor, please, for comments and questions to Tim and to Victor.
I guess one question, Tim, Victor, is clearly getting this implemented and embedded is no mean task. To what extent is this an issue of skill or an issue of will amongst our people?
Well, can I start from an observation and then Tim can... I think there is a great deal of commitment actually at the senior level. It's been people are very busy and they're very committed to the day-to-day, but it's been hard to get people to look beyond. I think the 5-year forward view was very helpful because it made this a key priority for delivering the 5-year forward view. That allowed us to have the discussion with senior managers and directors. I think they are really clear now about how this can help them deliver, and which is the key thing. So if it doesn't, I think the next bit is how we get them to lead the delivery of this and the consistent delivery of this through the system, the NHS England system, and how we as NHS England do the system leadership that Tim's talking about with our partners. So it's seen as a collective effort. So I think we've made a good start. There are people out there that clearly get this, want it to happen and can see it as valuable. There's, I think, a lot more work to do to turn that kind of enthusiasm into culture change and system leadership.
I just very briefly to add, I mean, I think that last point, that this is definitely about culture. I think the 5-year forward, what we call Chapter 2 of the 5-year forward view, which is the section that highlights the priority around all kinds of social mobilisation to support improvement and sustainability of healthcare, has absolutely helped leadership across, not just NHS England, but across the whole health and care system to recognise patient and public participation is not a nice to have, it is an absolutely fundamental part, as any customer-facing business would realise, of delivering a high quality and effective service. And I think that's been a big change. So I think, even in the last year, senior leaders in this organisation and elsewhere have begun to understand really deeply that this is a profound priority, and for many people I think there is just a problem about how do you make it real. So what are the specific actions me in my role can take to, and that's the bit that we now need to support people with. So in appraisals, in personal development reviews, in all those different ways we need to build a set of, I think, very clear guidance and tools to support people in having a different kind of conversation. But I think the will is there, and I think the skills are absolutely, we need to help support
just
development.
A very quick point on that. Margaret was great on the task force for pointing out I don't know whether some of the governance implications for this, which I think we need to take into account as well. We need to have the line of sight.
May I call on Margaret?
Thank you for your kind words, Victor. I was actually going to major on my pet subject, and that's governance. And I was going to say that it has actually been a huge privilege working on the project because, in a way, it puts the NHS at almost as a vanguard institution in terms of developing trust in a way that really needs to be more widely rolled out with all our major institutions. But one of the things that's going to be really key here is actually measuring. To get the cultural shift, we not only need to work to the practices, and the triggers are very simply set out in the paper, which is actually enormously helpful to everybody, but it's also a question of ensuring that we are actually measuring to the best of our ability the progress that we're making. And this means looking, for example, at how are those who are hard to reach being able to access, and there is a very good tool that has a template that's been established, and really that's really going to be the key aspect, because we can't employ sensible analytics unless we have the measurements.
I was awaiting a response, but
it doesn't.
Well, I agree.
We agree. Violent agreement.
Yes.
right. Well, let's go to Moira, please.
Someone who's not been involved and therefore much less well informed. But I just wanted to ask about monitoring. Of Section 7, it says ongoing engagement with staff and external. A consultation will close 1 year after publication. And a formal review of the policy undertaken. I just wanted to understand what that actually means. And my second question is linked to consultation, because in your ladder, as it were, of involvement or participation, consultation would be where the NHS has spent its resources formally, as it were, because there are many very heavy already legal requirements around consultation. Do you imagine that actually we would be able to shift some of the resource around consultation into other parts of that ladder, or would that be an ambition? I'm not looking at you, Margaret, particularly.
So in terms of, given the importance, and not just for legal reasons, but just for good practice reasons, of quotes consultation, you're asking the degree to which we can sort of both embed it but not turn it into a massive burden. Is that the?
Well, I think that, for example, you often come across situations where people feel already they put a lot of effort into including people. Then you come to the formal consultation and something completely kind of different arises. And those responsibilities are still there to consult formally, and I can see that would drive people to think, why bother really, kind of thing. So it's a very practical kind of real life question, not anything intellectual.
I think you're absolutely right. I think if you look at the ladder of engagement and participation, and indeed the guidance that we've set out for staff, I think what we're doing is redesigning the process of consultation. So it's not just consultation, it's also engagement, co-design. And because I think what people have experienced is two kinds of consultation, really. The sort of tick box, and then when they get the service, it's actually what? I didn't really, the implications weren't explained, I wasn't really engaged, and that's not really what we want. and the other kind, which is where we get change, which is actually co-designed, involved. I mean, the example that Tim's given on the specialist commissioning, but also service change on the ground. There are examples of really quite fundamental service change that have been because we've actually applied good practice. So I think it's about redesigning and representing not our statutory requirements, but within the context of actually getting engagement, building public trust, and actually the documents that we've set out for staff do that step by step. So we explain that it's not just about doing the statutory in the way we've done it. This is a better way of doing it. I think that's pretty...
Yeah, and just to say, I think more, in a way, unhelpfully, the word consultation doesn't mean formal consultation. So here when we're saying, what we're really saying is, as part of, you know, obviously this is the setting down the principles for participation, so this itself should be fully participated in. And what we're saying is therefore that stakeholders who are already been extremely helpful, but on an ongoing basis, we want to have the conversation about whether these are the right principles, so that, and we're going to have that conversation on an ongoing basis with people inside the organisation, others outside it, and then we'll sort of close that down and initiate a review of whether or not whether this document needs to be amended or not. It's not like a formal consultation, it's meant to be an ongoing iterative process of conversation. Probably that's a better word. And I think actually one of the things here is that the existing taxonomy for the ways in which public services think about engaging with people, the language itself doesn't fit the modern purpose. I mean, formal, you know, people in my old experience at the Cabinet Office would spend really quite a considerable amount of time trying to figure out why they didn't have to do a 12-week formal consultation and instead do a less formal one. You know, so we need to get away from that and actually just get to a point where this is regarded as business as usual, and this is about having a conversation, perhaps rather more than a consultation.
If I just go back, because I know you weren't specifically looking at it, but if it helps, I think that one of the useful things about the triggers and the way in which the case studies have been outlined is that they do actually give guidance on the questions that need to be asked at the front end. And if you're asking yourself the right questions and scoping, then when at the point of consultation, you should be getting towards the right end objective, so that you don't feel, my goodness, we've done all this work and it hasn't actually ended up in the right place. So it is a question of asking the right questions at the front end, and that's really why I favour the simplicity of this document, because it does help just focus on what the questions are that should be asked, depending on what type of decision you're aiming for at the end.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Very useful conversation. I mean, it's always quite intriguing to me that Section 13Q itself has a very confused view as to what this is about. It talks about service users being involved, whether by being consulted or being provided with information. Well, you know, being provided with information is not involvement. So I'm very impressed by what is being proposed to us today, which takes us well beyond that statutory requirement. So I think on that basis, I'm going to invite the board to approve the policy and the statement of arrangements and the guidance on patient and public participation in commissioning, and also to support the recommended 10-point plan. But I think with the advice from the board that we've heard this morning around measurement, metrics, and can we come back to the board with some appropriate metrics so that we can see whether we're actually living up to the promises we make in the document. And I think also tied into that, the consistency of operational delivery, which I think would be a critical point. These things can sometimes be very lumpy and uneven across the organisation. And then the third issue, which I thought was made very well by Margaret, about hard to reach communities. Simply providing information, for example, as the statute suggests, goes nowhere to hard to reach communities, and this requires a much greater investment of time and effort than might otherwise be involved. Subject to all of that, our colleagues on the board content to endorse the paper. Good. Thank you very much indeed.